Thanks for joining. We're going to move very quickly today, and I'll share a presentation. I've titled it Lean Architecture Excellence in Project Delivery. This is a presentation I first gave 4 years ago at the AIA National Convention and then at numerous venues in between. So we've got about 45 to 50 minutes for me to get through this. So I'm going to move very rapidly. If for some reason you can't hear well or my voice breaks up, let Julie know and she'll break in and we'll make some adjustments. I'm going to skip through learning objectives. There will be a download that you can get a handout probably tomorrow, and so you'll have it for your, if you'd like to get one. Briefly today, I'm going to talk about process management, what the current thinking is there in businesses around the world. From that, I'm going to distill 3 goals. Frankly, I'm an architect. I've got 30 years of experience, and generally I speak to architects, although I have spoken with contractor groups before, and obviously have worked with construction managers and others for years and years. But my focus really is primarily working with the client on that side and in the practice of architecture. So process management, then I'll define really what I call lean architecture, talk about management, documentation, a little bit about technology. I call it patterns, or how do you get these ideas infused into your firms, and then we'll open it up for some discussion. So moving quickly, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, how did we buy music? If I wanted to buy that latest album by Pink Floyd or the Eagles, what did I do? I would get in my car, drive across town during business hours, and find a store that sold albums. And there were many specialty stores, if you remember, at that time. Thumb through the albums that they had. Hopefully what I wanted was in stock. If not, there were big volumes, and you could actually special order older albums, material, and then wait 2-3 weeks and it would come in. That's all been changed. Apple and iTunes upended the industry a number of years ago, and there's a new way to buy music. I believe it's 25 to 30% of all music in the United States is sold via iTunes. And why has that worked? And why are we going to talk a little bit outside the business of architecture and construction and buildings? Because it'll give us a little bit of insight maybe into how we can do what we do better. What I want to put forth to you is that basically Apple has made it very easy for you and I to purchase music. They've taken out all the steps in between and greased the wheels, if you will, to make it simple. And I have three kids, all with iPods and iPhones, and as you can imagine, we have a considerable bill with iTunes. But again, they've made it easy to purchase the product. So the question then again is, can we make it easy to do better work? Can we make it easier to do higher quality work? Briefly, process management, I'll talk about Lean, Six Sigma, and my favorite, the theory of constraints. Process management is really being utilized by businesses and entities all across the nation and the world, really initially getting it started in manufacturing. Where you go back to the Ford Motor Company of 100 years ago, more famously Toyota, and really investigation into their operation yielded the term lean manufacturing. But it's since spread, software development, obviously construction, healthcare. Starbucks embraced lean with the latest downturn in the economy with an eye towards making their baristas more efficient and drinks out quicker, lower staffing, etc. So what is lean thinking? Well, briefly, lean thinking is about the removal of waste in a system. And the first step is really to identify value. Well, what is value? Value is anything that our client is willing to pay for. Value is something that changes the shape or the form of a process or a product. The customer cares about it, and we're going to do it right the first time. So what are the steps or the items of value in what we're doing? Can we identify those versus those that don't add value? If you take all those value activities and put them together, there's a value stream. Can we make that flow? At the client's request for us to perform work, can we pull it through our offices? And then finally, can we focus on it and perfect this as best we can? But there's a real focus on flow. Six Sigma, developed by Motorola, I believe in the, my goodness, 1980s, 1990s. It is more about reducing variation and looking at originally manufacturing processes and then later internal processes related to that, but defining them, measuring, analyzing, looking at that data with an effort then to improve and ultimately control processes. But there's a focus on problems. My favorite, the theory of constraints. This is Eli Goldratt, is an Israeli thinker, shall we say, came up with this, and really it's all about the management of constraints, or something that prevents an organization from obtaining their goal. And so what's an architect's goal? What's a contractor's goal? Well, to progress projects, to get paid. You know, the basic goal, if you want to boil it all down, is we want to make money. We want to make a profit. What's keeping us from doing that? Can we identify constraints? Can we exploit a constraint to see how we can get the most out of it? Can we subordinate other processes to help that constraint work the best that it can? Elevating a constraint means there may be major changes that we do to increase this constraint's capacity. For example, if we're short on project architects in our office, that is a constraint that many firms face. How do we attack that issue? There are different steps here, and then ultimately you repeat the cycle once you've got the best out of that constraint. But again, the focus is on constraints or things that prevent us from getting what we want to. I frankly, what I do when I look at Lean, Six Sigma, theory of constraints, I'm not about being religious about it. I'm about getting value from this for myself and our firm. So I'm going to beat them and make them work for me, and I'm going to beg, borrow, and steal from each of those to find something that works. So I've distilled down 3 goals that I believe are very applicable to architecture firms and really perhaps to any business. But they are briefly: structure work to flow. Can we do that better? Can we reduce variation in the ways that we work within our teams, across our office, or if you're like RTKL or others, across many offices? And finally, can we identify and eliminate what keeps us from doing good work, or constraints? A number of years ago, I was exposed to lean construction by Bill Scott with Lindbeck. Gave me information to read and really started me on a lean journey. And I came up with the term lean architecture really about a decade ago, and started to use that to describe a different way of looking at the practice of architecture, not just as a craft and as a series of isolated groups, but could we start to look at it a little bit more holistically and more from a process standpoint. And so I've titled it really just Rethinking Architectural Methodology. First thing I want to talk about management and some applications, and this is really project management that I'm speaking to, with a goal of progressing the project. When we progress projects, that is how we get paid, and so it's obviously very key to what we do. And what we've observed in our office at RTKL is that the projects that run faster tend to be more profitable for us. Projects that drag out do not. So again, going outside of our industry, many of you will probably remember these automobiles if you were around in the 1980s. That's when I was in college. On the left, we have the infamous Chevy Citation, and on the right, we have a Honda Civic station wagon. Now, the X-body cars by General Motors, of which the Citation was one, have been long gone. They were awful cars. They were, however, going to retake the compact cars from the Japanese, and we were going to, it was going to be a renaissance at General Motors. However, that was just not the case. Why is that? Well, a lot of that is because there were very different ways that the American automakers designed, engineered, and constructed automobiles versus the Japanese. And borrowing from a book by MIT, Made in America, Regaining the Productive Edge, they examined how automakers worked. And briefly, at that time in the 1980s, General Motors, Ford, Chrysler pretty much were organized like this. They had a design group with a manager who would develop concepts and ideas for a car and the specifications, and they would get it to a certain point, and then it went over a wall to a product engineering group, which again had a manager. That group would take an engineer and seek to, execute the design. Inevitably, there were issues, and there was some back and forth, back to design for changes, back to engineering. They would then, when they were done, would go over the wall to manufacturability, which was another group of individuals who were charged with setting up the tooling and the assembly line within a plant to produce this car. And again, we're looking at new model car development. Inevitably, what they would find was that what engineering and design had approved, frankly, just wasn't going to work. The tooling wasn't quite right. They couldn't bend it that way, or someone couldn't get their fingers in to turn a bolt. And so back to engineering, back to design. It took over 5 years to bring a new car to market. And as you can see with the blue, little blue rectangle there, there was an overlap. And they actually started production before they had the bugs worked out. And General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler cars of that time were famous and very well known for having problems. That's where the lemon laws came about. But in essence, standing back, there were walls between the disciplines. It was a sequential, iterative process. General Motors had over 6,000 separate suppliers. They were strong-armed. They were not team members. They would perform at the cheapest price. And when they encountered defective parts on the assembly line, they merely discarded them. By contrast, the Japanese had a very different way of working. They had one manager who was over design, engineering, and manufacturability. It took them 19 less months to bring a car to market. One team that was concurrently designed to build. They were not going to design something that couldn't work engineering-wise or be manufactured. They would catch problems before they became issues. Suppliers were part of the team. They were family. Toyota, now the world's largest automaker, at that time had only 337 suppliers. And when they encountered defective parts on the assembly line, they wanted to know why. So again, stepping back now into the architectural world and project delivery, what might be some things that we could learn from this? Something that we discovered in the 1990s during the CAD era was that doing projects and healthcare projects, which tend to be, you deal with a lot of users at different levels, there's a lot of regulation. They're different than working with developers who I liken to cowboys on horses with 6-shooters and turning on a dime. But what we observed was that if we staffed our projects up during design and put, say, 7 or 8 people on a given project, we could staff down to 2 or 3 or 4 people during construction documents if we had really worked that project, if we had really vetted the design. And our goal became not to let design linger into the documentation phase. We're going to protect documentation. And we're going to actually, and we've done this, we actually are going to invoice for more fee up front with a goal to really beat the daylights out of the design and vet it and look at options and discover all that up front. And then again, documentation, piece of cake, should work easily. So longer design phase, shorter documenting. While we're designing it, we're also engineering it. And we're not going to let any design ideas progress that frankly can't work. And then we're also going to work with a contractor or others to really develop what can be built and afforded. We want to solve issues as we go. Too often I see architects allow problems to accumulate. We're really not going to look at life safety right now. We'll deal with some of those issues a little bit later. We kind of tend to skip over things, and they ultimately all the problems will be solved. I would prefer to solve them during design and not during construction. I'm sure you probably feel the same way. Can we do work right the first time? That's a great emphasis. And then an important thing too is, can we make level paths for others? I discovered before, and you may have as well, that if we will look out for other people's work, it will actually benefit us in the long run. I've learned, what the structural engineer needed to do their work effectively, and I've learned what the MEP engineer needed. And in essence, they became a client of mine during the design process. And if we understood what we needed and made sure that they got it, we found, excuse me, that they performed better, and we had fewer coordination issues and problems throughout the jobs. Another thing that we've done, a screenshot here from a PowerPoint presentation, is we looked at could we help organize the client to make decisions better. Frankly, if you're in the educational environment or healthcare or working on government projects, that's not their business, the delivery of buildings and construction. Their business is helping people get better or educating students. And we're kind of a nuisance to help them get what they really want, which is a facility to do their work. So a lot of the terms we use, schematic design, design development, these are foreign terms. So we redefined them in a document here that we give them a hard copy and share in a meeting. But we actually explain what we're going to do and the levels of information and the questions that we're going to ask and the importance of making decisions and the ramifications if we change decisions later. This is not a perfect process. What I'm talking about, and you're probably very aware, it's very difficult to move projects forward at times depending upon our clients and the politics. But can we make an effort nonetheless to educate them and help them make decisions earlier on? Another thing that we found that was very successful, again, by thinking up front, was to not just develop a building from a quantitative standpoint, but also qualitatively. So for a job that I have currently finishes construction in June in the northeastern United States, back in 2007, this is our concept package for the project. And again, at that time, we tied down percentages of curtain wall, masonry, and things like that to help the contractor to get his arms around the value of the project. Again, not just quantitatively, but qualitatively. We use a lot of imagery in a document here to display, we're looking at terracotta and masonry and Pilkington glass systems. We ultimately went down, and for all major spaces in the hospital, we gave them a pretty detailed description of where we were going to use terrazzo versus sheet rubber, which is more expensive than sheet vinyl. And we defined a lot of the quality of the components of the project. We let them know at that point, we're going to be using stainless steel brick ties and things like that. We're going to be using solid surface countertops everywhere. And again, we found that the budget that was developed in 2007 has actually reduced through SDs, DDs, and construction. Here's that same project at the schematic design phase, and it has moved on quite a bit. But again, we took 3D renderings that were generated to show the client the development and design and added notes to them for the contractor's benefit to help him when he was putting pricing together. And then since this was developed in Revit, we were able to use color coding and legends to convey finishes and things like that. Deliberately, we went through to identify all the pots of money. So we got the designers and said, this is your one chance to get everything in the job that needs to be there. So you have to put your design thinking caps on now and imagine what you want. And we used hand sketches, 3D renderings, etc., to convey to the client and to the contractor what we were imagining so that they would have a value of that. You'll notice it's a lead project, so we identified all the potential points, and then we also included complete interior finish schedules down to the base, every material we anticipated using at schematic design. And then we also listed what we call issues and assumptions, all the areas of uncertainty or potential risk for the owner and for the contractor that we were aware of. We advertised those to them so that, again, that the budgets are reliable and good, and there's confidence in that as we go forward. It's worked very well. Another tool that we used is I call it a critical path checklist. Most checklists are looking at items. This one rather is looking at tasks to accomplish, things that we want to think through during schematic design and design development. What do we want to have resolved before we go into the construction documents phase? This is actually inspired by Bill Nigro's Ready Check system. It's a great guide for thinking through projects. Also have developed what we call a design charette. This is done early to midway through schematic design. It's a 1 to 2 day exercise with the owner, their facilities people, maintenance people, the construction manager, major subcontractors if possible. Every engineer and the technical architects on the project are involved in this. And we go through and we're going to beat the daylights out of the project, and we're going to discuss steel versus concrete structure, slab on grade versus, we talk roof systems, And our goal is to pull out of the owner their preferences to find out what is working for them and what is not working, let the contractor and the engineers and the architect hear all that, and ultimately there's a summary document that came out of that, and we went through every system, and then we do a separate one on this just for technology systems, wireless, cellular reinforcement, you name it, all these different things. But we do this very early on, found this to be extremely effective at establishing budgets, educating our clients and the contractor and the engineers and the architect, and really moving forward more effectively. Again, skipping around here, project management. Something I've observed over the years is that not unlike an assembly line, there's a chain, if you will, that runs through every project. And our activities are going to hitch to the chain, and the chain will determine how fast we can move. We've had the experience where we've tried to move faster than the client, and it would blow up in our faces. My current project in the eastern United States, the land development process is that chain running through the job. It's a 2-year process, and so it did not matter what we would do. It would be at least 2 years before we were allowed to construct on our property. So our goal to get through there effectively was really we had to focus our efforts on validating the building and helping the civil engineer, because he had to be completion of all his documentation in this phase before the rest of the team. Differently, I had another client in the south central United States where the owner was the chain. We might say in this case the owner was the constraint. But in essence, this was an owner that wanted choices. We had one, it was a developer client, and this individual would personally approve straight base or cove base in a 6-story building and the colors. So we found that we had to minimally draw until decisions were made, and we had to reorient how we worked with this client to give him choices to select from. And so again, we're trying to be smart about how we employ our people within the office and how we work. And so we're adapting here, and again, trying to look at the project, understand how to work wisely. So again, management, can we structure our work to flow, reduce variation in how we work across teams, across offices? Can we identify and eliminate what keeps us from doing good work? Let's talk about documentation. And I'm going to be a little bit technology neutral here, because the systems that I'll show you will work for hand drawing, which is how I started out in the 80s, or CAD, or BIM. Mies van der Rohe, a famous architect, made a quote, less is more. Now, Mies was speaking of aesthetics, but I want to suggest to you that with a lot of our documentation and the ways that we work, that less can be much more. I'm not going to tell you the name of the firm whose projects these were. I'll leave that up to you. But 2 projects, same firm, different offices, 118,000 square foot hospital, 51 sheets of architectural CDs. It was a low change order job. Another project, 127,000 square feet, a little bit bigger, 3 times the sheets of the other job, and it was a low change order job too. Now, this is not an apple and an orange, but it's really kind of a Granny Smith and a Golden Delicious. The 118,000 foot hospital was kind of medium design. The 127,000 footer, that was a higher design project. So we'll give them a little bit of leeway here for that. But nonetheless, within the same firm, what a disparity in the production effort. Interestingly, I consulted a little bit with the team on the 158 sheet set, and to suggest ways that they might want to do it differently to save time and documentation, and their comment was interesting. They said, well, we've got a really good fee on this job, so it doesn't matter. So unfortunately, I can't hear what you're thinking, but I want to ask the question here, what are we looking at on the screen? I've shown this at other presentations, and the comments go from, well, that's a parking stripe, in the middle of the highway, or maybe it's a curb, or maybe it's a wall, or maybe it's just 2 lines. We really don't know what it is, but I'm going to add another piece of information. And so, again, now do you have a certainty about what this is? Probably so. It looks to me like it's a door and a wall. And most any housewife in the United States or a lot of kids could tell you that's what it is. It's a commonly accepted graphical symbol. If I take that forward now and add other information here, by virtue of just adding information to those two lines, I'll say seeing elements within context of each other, I don't really need a very sophisticated referencing system to know that that's a door or that that's a cabinet with a sink. Nobody thinks that that's just a book sitting on a countertop. Within the architecture and construction industry, these are very known, commonly known symbols. Can we leverage those to our use on the documentation side? Briefly, what are buildings and the documents that describe them? And organized complexity. Overlapping building systems, coordinated. Documenting projects should be the easiest thing that you'll ever do. The goal, conveying information. The goal is not to draw or to model. The goal is to convey information. I counsel people that I work with that they need to think slowly and draw or model quickly. I want them to draw less, draw smart, and do only what they know. We'll talk a little bit about it later, but holes in your drawings are important visual clues to potential issues or lack of information. Some architects want to have an appearance of completion, so they will draw things and provide that appearance of completion, and frankly, they'll build in potential coordination issues. Stephen Covey famously said, begin with the end in mind. Something that we don't do very well as architects is the planning of our documentation. Something RTKL has done is develop what we call guide drawings. I'll show you 3 examples of these. But in essence, we've developed a methodology, which I'll say is lean and mean. It's an approach. We want to start our teams off 90% complete on these. We're looking for visual quality control. As a manager, I want to come in, I want to look at drawings, and I want to see mistakes. I don't want to have to right-click and drill down through menus. I don't want to even have to turn the page. I want to look at a sheet and hopefully have that speak to me. Important to remember, no time savings in thinking through the issues of the project. We're going to save time documenting. And we want these to be instructional, and we want them to be intern-friendly and contractor-friendly. First example is a partition types we use at RTKL. This is a system where we use a number of graphical defaults. In essence, those 2 lines that I showed you several slides ago, it's an accepted graphical convention. We're going to leverage that in projects and eliminate, even though in our Revit model, the model knows what the wall is, we're actually not going to tag the vast majority of partitions because we find that we don't need to. Contractors just know from looking at it. But this is just a single sheet that every project gets. It has obviously a number of defined partition types. You can add the atypicals. We have a lot of notes and vignette drawings for the contractor and the intern who's drafting it. And then we round it out with basically typical chases. We've decided, the senior architects, what our chases will be for the whole firm. We're not going to leave that up to the drafter. And we've rounded it out with typical details. Just from back when this was in CAD, you can kind of see an idea. And again, we have what we call graphical defaults. These are not necessarily referenced on the drawings. This is an A3, 3 5/8 stud, real simple. You might guess that an A6 would use a 6-inch stud. And so if there are variations of this, we tag these on the drawings. So here's final construction documents for a healthcare renovation project. As you can see, all the partitions are tagged using our system. This is one of my jobs. I've been using this system since 1996. We have no issues with this. We'll touch on it in a minute, but you might notice also that all the cabinetry is referenced in the room here. We'll talk about that. From a visual quality control standpoint, a number of years ago, we decided to put the tagging information on the drawings. What's of great value is in our parlance, this is 2-hour fire smoke rating coming down here. I've got a B label. I don't need to turn 40 pages. I don't need to right-click on a symbol and drill down to see it's right there. Again, this is a family attribute in Revit, so it's extractable and can be combined into a traditional door schedule chart. We schedule doors by type. This is the guide sheet that we use. Everybody gets this. It pops in. The doors, as you add them into the model, they start filling in the schedule. We round it out with typical details and elevations. Again, you can look at this in a little more detail on the handout. We're also scheduling handicapped accessibility clearances and handicapped, or rather, toilet accessories. This is again, this is actually from a project, but we drop in a toilet accessory schedule developed in 1996, updated a couple of times since then. Frankly, it hasn't changed. And we have a lot of typical vignette drawings of components, the elevations, a typical toilet, and I'll go through these. This was developed in 1996. I did this. It met ADA. We updated it with ANSI in 01, and then just recently, last year, updated it with changes to ADA. I've worked for, this is our 17th year now using this. I've used this on nursing homes, churches, and up to a $250 million hospital project. I am not aware of a single bust handicapped accessibility-wise ever in any of these jobs I've done. But things are done once here, and the WC is going to be plugged into other drawings, such as this is an actually project-specific toilet room, and there you see the WC plugged in, but we're not going to repeat dimensions. Why are we doing that? Because the people that are drawing this are the least experienced, lowest paid people in firms. And we don't want them making decisions about where grab bars go and things like that, but rather let's get the senior people to do that and develop a system that seamlessly gets that down where folks can use it and plug it in. So I call it a plug-and-play system. So this drawing is on that same sheet. We've obviously added information for the construction of walls. The T5 symbol will be referenced into the floor plan that you see here. Merely by looking at these numbers, and we change the type and the size to make it stand out graphically, I can see that just by having a T1, all the accessories and accessibility clearances are referenced in for that room. This is almost a foolproof system. You do have to think with it, but we have all kinds of folks using it, never have issues. This is the last system I'll show you. This is how we've been drawing cabinetry for, again, 17 years. These elevation, or sections rather, are 17 years old. They just frankly don't change. We have some extras that we pull in for atypical situations. But in essence, we've developed a lot of default notes that set standards for the contractor. This is all coordinated with specifications. And then we draw elevations a certain way. But the key, and I mentioned this earlier, is that we don't reference, with only a few exceptions, we don't reference on floor plans elevations, but rather the title of the elevation tells you what it is and where it applies. And so this elevation here applies to treatment room 3233 east wall. And then we flag. This system, again, contractors have loved it. We have no issues if we do it. We just make sure that we put the elevations in ascending order numerically on the sheets, and really works well. It cuts the graphic density of floor plans significantly. We used to get guys who would work in CAD, and all they would do would be move information around so we could read stuff, because the dimension was on top of the cabinet, was on top of the other symbol. We've wrapped up a lot of these in what we call guide documents, which is a short, sweet, graphically friendly document that we give out to people to talk about dimensioning or door partition or door systems or partitions, something we have available on in intranet. Briefly talk about organization of projects. I've got my resume up here. As you can see, it's a little bit older picture of me. I've got a little more gray, but I think this is a nice resume. It's got, it's decently organized visually. I've got some color on there, but I bet that, and you'll probably agree with me, that we could organize this a little bit better. I found a program on the internet, and I copied and pasted all the text from my resume, and it sorted it for me alphanumerically. And so I have 3 sheets at the top with all the letters, numbers, and punctuation, and then color graphics and grayscale graphics. And so, yes, I did have a 2-page resume. Now I have a 5-page resume. But I want to suggest to you that this is probably better. No, maybe not. What I will suggest to you is that this is how we organize drawings, that we fragment our drawings and we pull information apart every which way. The Friday Morning Club building, downtown Los Angeles, is still there. 1922 by Allison and Allison Architects, and this is the one of the sheets. You can see they've broken all the rules of the National CAD standards, and they've put plan details, wall sections, partial elevations all together. Of course, they should not be doing this. You'll notice that this is a wonderful old drawing. This is back when our profession was a craft. Interestingly, you'll note the plan details occur right below where they are on the elevation. The wall section is right there, and the only referencing, there's minor referencing with a little A and a B and a D. I don't know where C's at, and you'll see it right there. Very minimal referencing, but yet this almost 100 years later, any of us who are in the profession here could get through this and probably construct this. It has been suggested, though, that the fact that there is no door shown here, that the contractor probably would want a change order for that. So, here's the modern example. We call it working in context. Grant Simpson coined the term, but it's basically locating information and drawing elements in context with each other to a story, as opposed to fragmenting that information like I did with my resume. This is a project down in Miami. From the 3D model, we can put some imagery in here, and then sections, elevations, plan details, really very informative on one page. So again, wrapping up this, 3 goals. Can we structure our work to flow in our offices? Can we reduce variation in how we work? Can we identify and eliminate what keeps us from doing good work? Rapidly, technology, confusion of goals, perfection of means seems, in my opinion, to characterize our age. I would say this applies to technology and its application. I believe there are some goals we've got to have with technology, and these are my observations, but this is where I see it heading. We want to know before we build. RTKL is doing increasingly greater amounts of work with simulating how people actually use our buildings, how they walk through them, how they work in them. Visualization has been around for a long time. The computers just made it better, faster, cheaper. And then obviously firms like Beck and many others have brought great expertise to the ability to estimate models. But frankly, I'm going to be mean and nasty about it. I want it to work for me. So I'm not here for technology. Technology is here for me. So it's got to be, I want it to work faster with greater accuracy. I'm looking to automate the repetitious aspects, and I want to desperately leverage information and knowledge. George X. George X is a Six Sigma consultant, worked with General Electric. He is credited by their former CEO with turning General Electric around and helping them realize billions in profits. I heard this presentation by George X, and he said, speaking, I believe, in the mid-2000s, that over the 10 previous years, American efficiency had dropped between 10 and 15 points. Well, why was that? Technology. He said, we are spending so much time upgrading to the next version of the software, learning the new features, changing from one version to the other, upgrading our hardware, learning now to use smartphones and this and that. He says that it is actually impacting our ability to get work done, and it's and our efficiency has went down. I want to suggest that information is cheap. I started off using sticky back. I could tell a story about BIM toilet doors, but I'm going to run out of time here. In essence, RTKL had a project where for a toilet stall door, somebody grabbed a regular door that had a card reader that was invisible because it was an attribute in the family. They brought it in, resized it, populated it through a very large structure, and ended up with dozens of card readers extra when the model was extracted by the contractor. Funny story, but invisible information. All that to say that information, frankly, is cheap. My current project, $250 million-ish in construction. It's been going on 5.5 years. As of October, 108,000 separate files, 5,000 folders, 185 gigs of information. How do we keep it straight? Here's a simple system we've used, and we haven't followed all the rules here, but this has been extremely effective to, in essence, use a project identifier, a date that sorts because we put the year first, and then what it is. And so here we see files, here we see folders. We're at the point right now where we're taking this company-wide. This has been very effective to help us get through and find information that's just buried in folders. So again, structure your work to flow, reduce variation in how you work, identify and eliminate what keeps us from doing good work. Last section, patterns, how can we do it? get this into our firms. Steve Wozniak, Apple Computer. Sometimes when you're short of resources, it forces you to do better work. I would imagine that most of the firms, people, companies here, you're short of resources. We're all stressed in that respect today. Quickly, let me talk about billable work. It's very important today for people to be billable. I've heard it within our firm. And here's some great examples of billable work. And this is, in any firm, this is perfectly acceptable to make the same mistakes again. It's billable. We can over-document, over-model. How about re-researching that roof system again for another project? How about reinventing firm standards? This is all billable work. And then, oh my goodness, I shouldn't say this, but I'm touching on design. How about redesign? If we took a firm of 25 employees, and we'll say that on average we want to earn $90 an hour for them throughout the year, and just get a 5% improvement. We want this year, and then we're going to do it again next year. This year we want a 5% improvement by everybody, by working smarter, by modeling differently, by thinking about how we're doing it. That's $225,000 in value. That's 2,500 hours of time that could be gained. Here's how we did it. Part of a medium-sized firm that RTKL acquired in the year 2000. I was part of that. We went through a process where we, in essence, developed resources. We actually, these 3 systems, or 4 systems I showed you, were developed back then. We developed resources, frankly, by seeing where we bled in the office, what our problems were, what were the constraints that were keeping us from doing quality work. We developed resources, we distributed those, we educated them through a variety of functions. Obviously, we didn't have intranets back then. I used overhead projector in 1996. And then we started to touch projects at 50% design development, looking at building systems, and then these firm drawing and documentation systems. We would introduce those to the teams, and then we would come back most of the way through construction document phase. Now we're looking at technical detailing, and had they used these guide sheets correctly? And if not, why not? Sometimes we found they would use them differently than we intended, and their way was better than what we were thinking. So we would learn from them. I'm not going to spend much time here, but we'll ramp it down real quick. I've worked in small firms for about a third of my career, medium-sized firms for about 8 years, and then a large firm for the last 13. Small firms, not a lot of money to spread around, but you can do on-the-fly development, and there's best practices. Word of mouth, informal communication, great way to communicate, and then the small firms, tremendous way to mentor on the job. And then intranets, surprisingly easy to set up and memorialize this stuff. Medium firms, I like medium firms in many ways. Single office usually, breadth and depth, less politics, less politics, less politics. They usually have some money and some staff that they can spread around. Again, on-the-fly development, best practices, not too big, word-of-mouth works. But now you're getting to a place where formal instruction it really has some value. Large firms, usually pretty well organized, have some money, but they can have firms within firms, and there can be a lot of independence, incredibly resistant to change, easy to spend your money and go nowhere. Development by committee to get the worst practices or least common denominator practices. Not, in my opinion, a good way to do it. But you can also, again, we're looking for best practices, not just standard practices. Again, OJT, mentoring works, and then other ways to distribute within. Last 2 slides, really. Let's talk quality, just to wrap it up. And this relates back to it. Quality is dependent on every preceding action. It's preventing mistakes from happening versus detecting and correcting later. Hopefully you saw that in the systems that I showed you. It's got to be planned for, built in, and designed into the way we work. And what is productivity? How about the avoidance of unnecessary work? How about more work in less time and better work with less effort? Again, the 3 goals: structure your work to flow, reduce variation in how you work, identify and eliminate what keeps you from doing good work. Tomorrow, I will have a handout out at a website that I maintain here called leanarchitecture.com, and I'll turn it over back to Julie.
Thanks, Mike. That was a great presentation. And just a reminder to all of our attendees, this is being recorded, and whenever I send out the follow-up email with the recording, I will also include a link to Mike's presentation. I do have a couple questions that have come in, and we'll also ask that if people do have questions to please use the question box to send those in. The first question I have is, how can we make perfect solutions for customers who change the requirements during the process of construction?
Well, an opinion, fire your clients. Oh, we can't do that, can we? We're desperate for clients these days. I used to have in an old presentation, I had a slide which had a group of people sitting around a table playing cards. And basically you're dealt a hand of cards and you got to play the cards the best that you can. That's been my observation. One of my current projects right now, we're in an area, we're going to change the floor material for the 4th time because the president of the hospital doesn't like what we've had. Well, there's no way to get around that, and because we're dealing with people. And so we're going to do the best that we can, and we're going to learn as we go. And I don't know of any better suggestions.
Okay. Another question I have is, how do lean methods differ with architecture versus construction? Are there similarities?
I believe there's tremendous similarities. I've found that there's tremendous discussion within the construction industry themselves with the AGC. I mean, they have funded and done an amazing job at getting contractors on board around the idea of lean construction. And then, of course, there's the Lean Construction Institute. What I have found is that there's the other side of the coin is, okay, you know what, I've got a project that's not going to start construction for a long time. I got 2 years of land development to go through that I got to work with the client on. How can we make our projects go more smoothly? How can we educate the client? And instead of them changing 10 decisions, maybe they'll only change 3 decisions. There's a benefit to me from a fee standpoint. There's also a benefit to the client because there's less hassle for them. So the principles to me can be applied to Starbucks, to construction, to architecture, to manufacturing. It's really up to us to do that. That is a whole separate endeavor in itself. And in fact, they're at ArchiSpec 2013 coming up in later March. I and Greg Buchanan from the Smith Group will be giving a joint presentation on basically applying lean principles at the firm level. Here I've spoken about excellence in project delivery. There, again, we're going to talk about how do you tackle a big firm like the Smith Group or the RTKL. And let me tell you, Greg and I are going to show up with bruises and bloody noses because this is tough. This is tough within your firm to get these things implemented.
That is very true, and that was going to be one of the questions I was going to ask you is, you know, RTKL is using lean architecture. How much of a, one is everyone within your company or just in general that are starting to use lean architecture, is it an uphill battle to get people on board with the idea? And does there have to be some kind of return first before either management or other designers actually buy into the process?
I was part of a medium-sized firm in the 1990s that were pretty lousy. When I joined them in '92, we were pretty lousy at delivering work. We were a planning firm that had morphed into a full-service architectural. So over that 3 to 5 year period, we transformed ourselves and developed a bunch of systems. And when I learned about lean later, it's like, oh my goodness, everything we've been doing, there's a name for it. It's called lean. It's called Six Sigma. It's called the theory of constraints. When RTKL purchased us, we brought those ideas into the firm and have been frankly working because they face all the same issues that we were facing. And so we've had a number of initiatives over the years that frankly haven't gone very far. The group, the firm that, and this truly is in some ways a firm within a firm, but those of us that were from that firm in the 1990s that are still there today, we have a way of delivering work that still survives. But frankly, there's a lot of freedom within the broader firm to do things the way you want to. What we found, though, as we communicated with the top leadership in the firm, we had different committees, and we finally organized one. It's called the Delivery Leadership Council, and I'm the chair of that group at this time. What we did is we actually went before the top committee in the firm with the CEO and senior leadership, and frankly weren't able to gain a lot of traction until recently. And one of the reasons is I think that the technology is breaking down the walls, and frankly, LA and DC offices need to work with the Dallas office and the Chicago office on this project. The technology lets us do that, but our own individual practices are a constraint. They're a hindrance to us working together effectively. We've kind of lived through that. And then in essence, we shared with them and we put it in financial terms. And we said, you know, forget about doing this for the sake of increasing quality. Let's make more money. Well, that resonated. And we're actually gaining traction. Similarly, Greg Buchanan with the Smith Group, he attended my presentation in 2009 on this, made contact, and we've been talking for the last, my goodness, 3 years, and now we're going to do a presentation because the Smith Group is doing the same thing. Multi-offices all across the country, significant resource stress. We've got to use the people we have wisely and better, so we need, you know, an office in Detroit to work with the DC office seamlessly. So frankly, financials are starting to drive it for us, not just the love of higher quality.
Great. I think we have one more question. Actually, I have a few more questions. Do you think the last planner system can work in architectural phases?
I would have to defer to someone else because I've not used that, so I don't know.
Okay. And that may be a question that we can have answered by Jason Mays, who did the presentation last week. And the other question I have is, do we have any other literature available on this subject? Is there anywhere that people can go other than, I think, one, your website's a great resource, but is there another resource people can go to get more information?
Let me flip a couple slides. Here are 3 books that I've read that were extremely influential to me. The bottom one, Made in America, Regaining the Productive Edge by MIT. This is a book published in 1989. I read it in the 90s. Great ideas. They didn't call it lean because the term hadn't been invented yet, but building on. These are some great resources. For that, again, I have a website where I have put up information on that, and I have downloadable presentations. And actually, the upcoming edition of it'll be the 15th edition of the AIA Handbook of Professional Practice. If you go to the construction documents section of that, I co-authored that, and you will find a pretty good primer on all these ideas. Grant Simpson and I wrote that chapter, and we actually have a brief discussion of lean architecture in there. So it is slowly getting out. I'm noticing at the AIA conventions that, and in particular at last year's Texas Society of Architects convention, that there are starting to be more presentations with lean as a theme. I know Cliff Mosier out in Los Angeles is a big proponent of lean, Stan Chu, there are a number of others. So it's slowly working its way into the architectural profession. It's really my hope that the AIA would see value in this and join alongside like the AGC has with the LCI.
Great. Well, Mike, I believe you've answered all the questions that have come in so far. Again, I just want to reiterate that this is being recorded. I will send this out to all of the attendees. And Mike, if there's any other questions that come in, I will send those to you so you can follow up with those individuals. And I really appreciate you being with us today.